Okay, so this is me painting rowan or mountain ash berries. I did the drawing without talking, but I thought maybe I'd talk through what I'm doing here in case that is of interest to people. So yeah, so I'm Lizzie Harper and this is some rowan berries. So what I tend to do is I work from dark to light, which I know is not what a lot of people in this field do, but it works for me. So I've mixed up here a darkish orange, which is cadmium orange light, with what else did we have in it? A bit of cadmium orange dark, and a little bit of red and a little bit of Van Dyke brown. So I always take quite a long time mixing up my colours. There's a cat, but I'm going to ignore the cat. So what I do is I plot in my darkest darks first. And to see your darkest darks, a good way of doing it is to half shut your eyes and see if you can find the shapes, more or less, of these areas. So they tend to follow a pattern as well. So once you've kind of half figured out where they're going to fall, it makes it easier. So I'll paint these in, and the consistency, I always say when I do teaching, the consistency of the paint is more or less like kind of blood. It's not very pleasant, I know, but you want it thick enough so that it leaves plenty of colour, but thin enough so you can move it around on the page. Okay, that's a bit too, let's make that a bit curvier. I'm not going to do this whole illustration. I'm just going to do some bits for a demo so that you can see how I work. And this is actually, these rowan berries are something I'm going to be getting my class. I teach a drop-in session in Hay on Wye on every other Monday night, so they're going to have the delights of the rowan berries to draw. So this berry here that I'm drawing is paler than the other ones, so there's less of this dark going on. Make sure everything's round and dents in where these remnants of the sepals are up here. Okay, so I'm only really going to do this little cluster. Now this one here, this berry underneath, this one, it's much darker because it's in the shadow of the other berry, so there's very little light going on there, but I'm going to leave a very thin white line here on the very edge just so you can see the distinction between the two berries. And you don't want all your darks to get muddy and meld in together. So even though that's kind of an artificial thing to do, I find it's very useful. Okay, it's a bit lighter on this top edge. Okay, we can do any more berries? Yeah, let's pop a couple more in, shall we? Let's do this one over here. Okay, so again, just looking for the darkest darks, plotting in those shapes. And in fact, the thing with painting berries, and in fact with painting a lot of things, is once you've done it enough times, you'll see that there are patterns, there are similarities. So painting these berries, there are certainly similarities with painting other autumn fruits like hawthorn berries, or even the individual drupelets of a blackberry. I'm lucky with this hawthorn. It grows in our garden. It's beautiful. It's all frothy with blossom in the spring, and then in the autumn it gives us these red berries, these sort of bright orange berries, and the blackbirds and the garden birds come in and fight over them. It's lovely. And the berries stay there right through the winter, actually, sometimes. Okay, so that's the first layer. So then I'm going to mix up a lighter one, so you can't see me doing this, because if I change the angle of the camera I'd never get it back again. But this is a brighter orange, and next kind of layer up. So then I'm just going to do my mid-tone. So seeing where I was with this, just go over the edge, and I'm going to paint over the whole area that I painted before. So I'm going to go over the whole area that I painted before so that it doesn't look kind of too stark. And so here we come down here a bit. There's quite a lot of shine on this one, so I have to make sure I use the white, because of course when you use watercolours, if you use the white paint, it's terribly chalky. But if you allow the white of the paper to show through, it is not, and that's good. So that's what we're aiming for. Okay, what's this middle one doing? It's got a bit of what's going on there, a bit of this mid-tone. And one reason why I'm going to post this in real time if I can edit it right and things, is because people have said with my speeded up videos, they've said that's fine, and they've been very gracious about it, but they've said they can't really see what's going on. So I thought if I just took a very, very simple subject and just quickly knocked something out, then maybe that might be of use to some people. Hopefully, anyway. Okay, so the edges here. And again, looking all the time. There's a rule of thumb, which if any of you have ever gone to art classes, I'm sure you'll have heard your tutors banging on about, which is you have to look at your subject 80% of the time. So most of the time, what you're doing is looking at the subject, and you are painting at the same time, but your eyes are almost always on what you're painting rather than on the sheet. Okay, rinsing the brush. And now mixing in a bit of bright yellow with that, even though that's not necessarily there, but I'm going to make this very watery because I'm now pulling towards the edges of the wash. So again, you know, it's just layering. I mean, in this case, it's almost concentric circles. Can you see? So that you end up being, that's way too yellow. That's rubbish. Okay, let's sort that out. That's not good. Okay, so again, but it's very watery. There we are. That's more like it. That's much better. So really, it's just, I mean, what I'm painting now is just 3 layers, if you think about it. 3 layers of paint, which are coming in from the areas of shine and overlaying one another. And because of the beauty and glory of our eyes, it tricks us into thinking that that's actually a shiny berry. So it's tapping into that, tapping into the ways that our eyes interpret lights and darks as much as anything, I think, illustrating is. Okay, it's very light there, so I need to be careful not to swallow up that. But it's darker there, but I do want to make sure that I leave a distinction between the 2 berries. Okay, that one's a bit rubbish, isn't it, really? Right, this one up here. Again, there's a bit of shine there, which I want to leave because it's beautiful. And this one here. So the rowan tree is it's a lovely tree, and there's an awful lot of folklore attached to it, which if I'd revised before doing this, I'd be able to tell you about, but unfortunately I didn't, so I can't. So I'll just have to talk about the painting instead. But it is one of my favourite trees. Right, so now, literally, with the very smallest amount of pigment in water, it's more of the same, you see. It just making sure you don't swallow up making sure you don't swallow up the white, but also making sure that the gradation between the darker colours and the areas of shine that you're talking about are slightly sort of natural. So here I'm going to cover up that edge bit because that's okay, because it isn't actually shiny. That bit there can go. Okay, so again, that's where the shadow is cast by the stem. So the main stem going behind the berries is a little bit purpley. So I'm going to put a tiny bit of purple in the mix. Plop that in as well behind. Again, I'm doing that little thing of leaving a tiny bit of white because it just helps the eye figure out what it's looking at as much as anything. I'll take it up to here and then let's go like that. Right, so inevitably this always happens when you're doing demos, is 9 times out of 10 when I paint rowan I quite like the result, and already I can see it going wrong, this one. So but there you are, the joy of painting live on camera. Okay, so I'm leaving that little bit of white, which again is very, very artificial, but it just means that you can tell the difference between the stalk, the stem and the berry, which is really important. Okay, so plotting in your darks, going down there and a little bit there. Okay, and then using a little bit of yellow ochre, which is one of my very favourite colours, mixing that in with the stem, and then just pop on top. Yeah, so for a quick study, these colours are absolutely fine. And that one I'll darken up in a minute. Oh, you see, I should have done these bits as well. I'll do those in a sec. I'll come back and give them a second pass. Okay. And I'm working today. I'm working on this tiny little snippet of paper or something I had lying around. It's Archer's hot press. But if you've seen my other YouTube videos, you'll see that I've quested and quested to find a hot press paper that I'm pleased with, because Fabriano, which a lot of people in the botanical illustration community used, including me, it went off the boil. They changed the manufacturing process, and it no longer really was fit for purpose. So I had to find a replacement. So actually my preferred replacement isn't Archer's. My preferred replacement is, there's two of them. Stonehenge Aqua, which you can get in the UK from Jackson's Art online, and also Fluid 100 by Global Art, who are an American company, and again you can get that from Jackson's. Right, so this is Archer's, but it's fine. Okay, so now, so you know, nearly there but not quite. So I'm going to now, the area around where the old sepals are, with very, very pale, just going to go over that, knock it back a little bit, because it isn't as shiny. Yeah, no, it's really not. It isn't as shiny as the actual shines on the berry themselves, so you don't want it standing out too much. There. Make sure your brush doesn't get dirty. I just picked up a bit of brown there, which wasn't very useful. Just go around there. Now then, looking at these berries, they are in real life, they're much more vivid and bright than the way I painted them. So the way I'm going to try and bring some of that back into the painting is by mixing up a really bright colour. So this is, oh, what is this? This is cadmium orange and, look, shall I give you, maybe, oh no. So it's cadmium orange and alizarin crimson. And just going around, finding the darkest darks. So the very centre of those shadows, and plotting those in. I mean, as with all things, also don't be frightened to do these things, because often when you're painting, you're like, oh my gosh, it's all, you know, it's all going rubbish. It doesn't matter. It's rubbish. But a lot of time it doesn't actually matter if it's rubbish, especially with this. It's just like an exercise. So there's a drop shadow there on this bit, and this bit's very dark, so I'll plot that in. These are much duller than they are in life. I think I put too much brown in the initial mix, which is annoying. Anyway, so coming around there, and then this one in the shadow. Okay, and now looking at it, I'm really dissatisfied with how horrid and dark they are, so I'm actually going to do a second pass on the brightest bits as well, which I don't normally do, but in this case I'm going to. They're not glowing. They're not glowing, and they need to glow. See if I can sort it out. That's better. Bit more power to the colour. That's much better actually, because they were very before. Now they're stronger colours. The colour's stronger and the whole thing works a little better. Okay. Okay, and then the sepal, so this is going to be brown, because it's very black, these left over little bit. They're sort of dark brown black, so I'm going to use a mixture of Van Dyke brown and a very dark blue. Pop these in. Okay, and that bit, that's the old bud that never made it. Is that dry enough to do yet, do you think? What do you reckon? Yeah, let's give it a whirl. Fine. And here, got to be a bit careful here because you're in amongst the light, so you don't want to swallow those up. The brush I'm using is the same brush I always use, which is Winsor & Newton Series 7 sable. They're very expensive, but they really do hold a point like nothing else I've tried. Other good brushes, there's I think there's Rosemary and Company. Some people swear by. I don't particularly get on with them, but I know that they're meant to be very good. So they're worth a try if you're looking for a slightly cheaper alternative. Okay, now I'm going to work into those sticks going on behind. So again, this is a darker colour. This has got a lot more blue in it. See where those shadows are falling. Okay, there we go. Try and get it right. And often you'll find that there's a shadow right where a berry, or a flower in fact, attaches to the stem. So that's a good thing to remember. What's happening here? That's casting a shadow over here, isn't it? So that's done like that. Okay. Okay. And there's some very dark bits just here where these three berries are all together in this zone. So for that I'm using a purple. That's because it seems like the right thing to do. And let's just plop that in there. It's here, isn't it? There we are. So make them stand out one from another. Are there any darks here? Yeah, there's some real darks here. Often right on the edge of a berry, you've got lighter areas. So look out for that as well. And we'll have something of the same going on here, I should imagine. Yes, there's the dark. Okay. Okay, so those are more or less done. I'm just quickly, since you're here and since you're being patient with me, I'll quickly show you how I do the leaves, which is, again, very similar. So with the leaves, this is, what have we got here? Just a mixture of greens with a bit of yellow ochre in, a little bit of blue in. I mean, a lot of people are very prescriptive about how they mix their paints, and I totally respect that. But I just tend to keep visiting my paint box and mixing until the colour is fine and I'm satisfied with it. So it's just a different approach. Okay, so if I'm doing a leaf, it's the same approach throughout. Darkest darks first, always looking at the subject. And then you work into your midtones, but I'm still plotting in the darks here. Very dark because it's got the shadow of the twig and the berry going on behind it. Okay. And often you'll find the darkest darks are up to the margin of the leaf, which always helps because it means you can see the distinction on the edge, which is nice. Okay. So I build up a network of tiny little marks. And in fact, to be honest with you, I use that same approach whether it's butterfly scales or fur, feather, leaves. It's my one trick. Oh, now you all know. Okay. There we are. And the other side. So obviously this is clearly just for demo purposes and it's a quick sketch. If this was going to be for a client, it would take a lot longer and I'd have to be concentrating harder. But as a demo, hopefully it's of some use to you guys. It's a case of be careful what you wish for. So several people have said, oh yeah, slow it down, do a slow one. Now I'm doing a slow one. I wonder how many of you wandered off to have a cup of coffee. Okay. So again, darkest darks. I always leave the midrib white until the very end. because it gives so much structure to the leaf. Yeah, see this arches, it's slightly not enjoying the paper that much, it's slightly furry. If I was working with good old Stonehenge Aqua or the old Fabriano, I'm sure I'd be a lot happier. Okay, and then midtones, which tend to, well, obviously they're paler, but they often are slightly yellower as well. So let's plot those babies in. So can you see, it's very much the same techniques I used on the berries. Just putting in your darks, working on the edges of your darks with your midtones, and then dealing with your highlights, and then coming back at the very end to give your darkest darks another swing bite. Okay, just there. Oh. Okay, and I'm going to take, while that leaf is drying, I'm going to take these bits a little bit dark because they're not dark enough yet. And in fact, the shadow on the branch under the berries is not yet dark enough. So my general shadow colour, lots of people have this, is a purple and a blue mixed together. And somebody was telling me just yesterday that Daniel Smith paints have a paint ready mix like that. I think it's called Moon Glow, she said. So I need to invest in that because I think it'll be very helpful. But so purple and a blue. Into those shadows. So it's the lights and darks that give it shape, you see. If you don't get enough distinction between your lights and darks, and you don't really know, your eye doesn't read it right and you can't see what you've drawn. But of course, the balance is to make sure that you get your lights and darks without it looking sort of too stark, and also, what was I going to say? Without it looking too stark, and also without swallowing up all your lights. You want to have the darks in there, but you need the lights to make it sing. Okay, we're nearly there with that leaf. Is that nearly dry yet? I do apologise. It's far from the best thing I've ever painted. I do apologise, folks. Right, okay. Let's do the top layer of the leaf. So this is much paler. With this, again, just like with the berries, very, very watery. And I'm just over the whole darn thing. Okay. Actually, I'm going to include the midrib in that there. Okay. Okay, and I'm slightly disappointed by these berries. They're not doing quite what I want them to do. So I have in my life some amazing watercolour inks. They're called Dr. Martin's Hydrus watercolour inks. Look, I'll show you. There we are. And I'm going to mix up with my normal watercolours a tiny drop of this yellow. So what's lovely about these is they're very transparent and incredibly bright, the colours. So if you need a lift or a kick, then you can use these. And I think these berries definitely need a lift and a kick. I'm not quite pleased with them. They're not glowing, and they do glow. So I'm going to use a little bit of the yellow and a little bit of the orange, which is called Brilliant Cadmium Red. It's actually a very pink colour. You've got to be a bit careful with it. I never use these straight, the Dr. Martens inks, because they're too much. But using them watered down and as a top wash, I do quite often, and they really do seem to help. So I'm going to pop this on top here. Let's see if it makes that berry glow in the way I want it to. Making sure that white remains, yeah? Yeah, that's better. And here again. Making sure I don't compromise the white areas. Yeah. And little baby. So can you see it really gives a kick to the colour. They're one of my emergency kit. I've got a lot of things in my emergency kit. I've got my Dr. Martens Hydrosinks. I also have my white gouache, which if you do swallow up your yellows and you really are stuck, a little bit of white gouache can help enormously, but it does make things look very chalky. If you can just avoid making it too dark in the first place, that is by far a better option. Okay, so there we go, so that's better. You see, it's just made them glow a little bit. Okay, now that leaf should be ready to revisit. So for this, I'm just going to plot in the darkest darks. I know we've done the darkest darks, but I always do it a second pass and you can pick them out. Now, don't put your fingers on what you've been painting. You will be lost. Or smudge. Okay. Pick out those darkest darks. Is it dried? It's more or less dried. Normally I'd leave it to dry a little longer, but I don't want to waste your time. Okay, and it's really very dark behind the berry and these bits of the leaf. Okay. And one final pass with these shadows. Don't want to overwork it. So I will be the first to say that this particular demo has been far from perfect. The actual finished result is not something I'm particularly pleased with, which just goes to show. That made it even worse. There we go. There we go. Okay. And just the very darkest dark bit, this again is a purple, this time mixed with a little bit of brown, and that's just going to go there. In there. And there. There. And there. And a tiny bit more on there. There we go. I mean, that'll have to do. But as a demo, there you go. That shows my approach, and it may not be the most successful of paintings, but it's hopefully it shows you how I work in real time. And if you like it, do leave comments and tell me, and I will try and make sure I do more like this, and maybe paint things slightly more successfully. But thank you very much for your time. If you want to see more of my paintings, you can visit www.lizzieharper.co.uk or look me up on Instagram and on Pinterest and on Twitter and on all of these things. And yeah, thank you very much for your time. Bye.